So first of all, I'd like to apologize for my slides, which is always a traditional thing in an art context. This is particularly bad as a couple of days ago, I became the only person to switch from macOS Lion to Debian Unstable. So I did this all by hand out of wooden implements written by Richard Stallman. This is Emacs. And rather stupidly, at midnight last night, I went, well, wouldn't it be good if I actually scanned in my handwritten notes, and that, which were probably nicer than the fonts on this install, which meant porting a proprietary library to download them from my pen, and so this is my slides, right? This is pretty much what you're gonna have. So there, I'm pretty much done. Okay, so 8 years ago, I wrote a blog post called The Register, and it was 8 years ago is a very long time ago. That's what you were using if you were incredibly rich 8 years ago. And it was a blog post about the public and the private space. And of course, no one in the history of sociology had ever touched on this before. And you know, I looked at, as a blogger, I looked at the previous literature on Technorati, and it seemed to be an open space. I'd spoken to a few friends at Tribe.net, and they'd never heard of these ideas. So I just, you know, wrote probably the first piece on this topic ever. And the executive summary of my damning new ideas were that we have different registers. We have different ways of speaking when we're talking to our friends, the public at large, and also when we're telling secrets. And this is sort of an important division, right? That most people think when we shift between private and public on the internet, there's a revelation going on. And often there's not a revelation going on. Often you say the same things in a private register to your friends, like, well, I kind of think that guy's a dick. And then when you're in the public space, like this, you don't say those things. You just say, well, you know, I kind of disapprove of, or disagree respectfully with what that person is saying. It's the same essential content, right? When you speak publicly, people map that back and go, I guess he thinks he's a dick. But you don't say it because you don't want to be on the front page of the New York Times saying, Danny O'Brien says, like, whoever he was referring to is dick. So this is the problem we have on the internet, is that frequently things that were written in that content, chat logs, little conversations between people, are lifted out of that context with no translation process and then dropped into the public. And it's actually one of those things that, it's one of those unregarded things that journalists do. This is the whole idea of off the record, right? Off the record isn't, I can't report what you're saying, and it isn't even kind of, I can't strongly indicate it's you saying it. It's that I'm not going to quote you word for word, I'm going to translate what you say in this intimate moment into the public register. And in October 2003, the problem that lots of people were struggling with was that, that there wasn't a stable place for the private. You would have these private conversations, but they would be instantly translated. And the example that I was talking about was actually a journalist colleague of mine had discovered the secret Foucault wiki. And it was all very, let's go and have fun and like change the world. And it looked terrible, right? It looked terrible. It looked like, you know, Bohemian Grove for people in Vibrams. And he said this to me very excitedly because I was like a muckraking journalist at the time. He said, God, look at this man, this is awesome. And then he found the invitation list and I was on it. And so there was this moment of tension and I sort of had to go, you know, this isn't as bad as it looks. Don't write about me. So I also made some predictions rather foolishly in 2003 to come with this problem. And I think this is why it's sort of interesting to go back and look at that now. One of the things I thought was, well, one of the things I'd noticed in TV is that as TV became more distributed, right, reality TV shows were just beginning to emerge, this sort of thing, people were dropping into the public register on TV very fluidly. Right? You turn a camera on someone and they'd suddenly go into press release mode. And you see this in reality TV. These people are very conscious of the role that they're playing, and increasingly so. But I don't think that was going to become any more instinctive. And again, reality TV show kind of thrives on that difference, that moment of the private register being blazoned out into public and sort of like salaciousness of that. But instead what I thought was that I said that private register will regain a foothold, and we'll learn a kind of tolerance for seeing that private conversation cut and pasted into this new context, and we won't freak out in the same way as perhaps we would have done in the past when we were more used to these gatekeepers. I think the thing that I didn't predict, and I hope that I'm forgiven for doing this, is what happened 4 months later, which was the launch of thefacebook.com, a Mark Zuckerberg production. And you know, a lot of the language around the Facebook, as we call it, the young people, I believe, call it that, is centered around kind of the privacy violations that go on because of Facebook, right? The idea that Facebook is gathering all of this data and redistributing and mining it and so forth. But I think, you know, you have to give credit to this rise of the social network, is that it did very successfully reclaim that private space. It recreated a place where people could use that register and sort of essentially escape the ravages of the Google bot, right? It was like a hiding place that you could go where it wasn't easy for your private register conversations to be suddenly thrown contextless out into the arid wastelands of HTML. So I kind of tied it up. That thing was handed. So this is one of them, right? So we had this move back from the public into the private and Facebook posts. But of course that's not perfect, and you know, people's private conversations still come up like this. But there are protections against this. There are both social protections. You're sort of relying largely on the understanding of your peers that this has been flagged as something that's for your friends. You're relying on this thing of the guardianship of the intermediaries, right? Where we are in this crazy situation where our most private conversations that we don't want to share with all the people in the world, we decide to hand over to a sort of faceless multinational corporation, right? But it would also explain some of the oddness of Facebook to someone who comes at it from sort of a traditional internet background, right? One of the things that's interesting about Facebook and Twitter and things like this is they have a very profound lack of search, right? They have a very profound lack of being able to like cut through and find things. And I think that this up here says David Bowie's teeth, right? I can explain that. So for me, or somebody, you know, from a pre-Facebook age, this seems really weird that like search is essentially broken on Twitter and Facebook. And you talk to the techies there, and they're kind of apologetic too. They're kind of like, well, you know, we really should get search working better over this whole thing. But they don't, and I think that's because there's no incentive to do this, because actually people want to preserve the context of what they're saying. And so the David Bowie's teeth thing is like, it's like when you're, you know, if you're a smooth nightclub singer and David Bowie turns up, all you can think about is he has terrible teeth. And how could he become successful with his terrible teeth? And I feel like search is like David Bowie's teeth. That's the one thing you will. That's the one thing you will remember about this talk, right? It was great. He did indeed have it fixed. A traitor to his country, my friends. So there is that. But there's also like another shift, and this going back to like the prediction I made. I think the really interesting thing here is the acceptance of the private voice. And Twitter is the thing that has been most successful in allowing people to speak in the private register in a public space, right? And going back to my earlier gratuitous swearing, I think Twitter celebrity swearing is the biggest indicator of this, right? If a celebrity, even, you know, a quite countercultural celebrity, had become swearing or dissing something in public, it would be news, right? It would always be news for somebody to use that. I see celebrities using cuss words that I would not talk about on a public Microsoft presentation. And you know, it's fine, because there's a set of sort of an introduction to that liminal space when you go onto Twitter. And of course, that's one of the reasons why people love Twitter, right? Is that they get this idea of intimacy with celebrities and that they're part of the conversation, so they're not shocked when the register is not the traditional public register. There's another thing that sort of like causes a great deal of heart-rending at the moment, and that's the sort of rise of the commentariat, right? These are people who comment at the bottom of formal public register documents. And you know, the clash and the pain and the angst of this that people like Anil has written about, I think a lot of it's put down and framed as this discussion of anonymity and pseudonymity and so forth. But actually, I think it's a clash of registers, right? A discussion is in the private register. What you're talking about and the framing of it is a public register. So you don't have comments, for instance, I don't believe the New York Times does this, on obituaries. Right? They've learned that, right? Because you have like this high public register thing, terrible death of prominent politician, and then you know what the comments are going to be. They're going to be, oh, well, I'm glad he's dead. And that's what you are. And so when people say, look, the comments make me despair about the human race, right? That's because they assume that what they're reading there is like basically horrible, filthy people who they would never meet. Right? But in fact, what they're seeing there is the private register. They're saying, people say things in comments that you and I would say here and now. And it doesn't sound outrageous to us, because we understand that sort of registration difference. Swearing Tom Friedman, I like to call it. Okay, so has there been any moves the other way? Have there been any moves into the secret? Well, there have, from my point of view. One, people are more, is that 5 minutes ago?
Yes.
Oh, right, okay, we'll bang through this then. So fame triggers. People have become more sensitive about things that will suddenly elevate them into the public sphere, even if they're not particularly famous. And I think the good example here is teachers, right? So teachers suddenly have a sensitivity about even stuff that they put on Facebook, because they know that they're sufficient of a public figure that suddenly something they say about something that isn't secret, it's just a private conversation, will be reframed and taken out like that. So they take this offline. They take this, I'll tell you later, they don't use their computer to have those kind of conversations. Also, we have this sort of move from the secret, okay, to the very public. We have things that people keep on their computers, and suddenly what you have is like the Stratfor explanation of these documents moving over to here. And so we have a greater fear now of keeping even our secret conversations on the form that we use to communicate, which is the personal computer. And I mean, I see this in my job, right? Which is because I protect journalism in places like Iran, Syria, and China. And what you see now is that Syrian activists, for certain conversations, just don't use computers at all. And that's a change, right? Because they're suddenly more cautious about the use of technology at all. Right? And this generalizes. People don't trust the computer anymore to keep their secrets. And there's another thing here, which is that given that, we have this new register, which is the register of things that we say or do that are recorded by our computers that we don't tell anyone. Right? My search history is not something that has any register or context to it at all. There is no tagging of how private or how public that is, and there's no suitable context for that. And of course, except all of that kind of data, like which websites they visit and so forth, is being spread up to these different areas without any kind of context, which is why you get the kind of shock and awe of Facebook Beacon, and you have this sort of worry and concern that stuff is just leaking out of this space. So now we have this new generic concern of like things that are unmoderated at all, things that we want to keep in a personal space, but we don't know whether they're on a personal space or whether they're on the cloud or where they are. And normal users just are very unconfident about even using technology to protect that kind of thing. So I should end with some predictions now. I do believe there will be more swearing in the public space, and I think that's a good thing. Because English people are good at swearing, so we'll do well. I think there's going to be a lot of panic, and this is a no-brainer, right? There's going to be a panicked action to try and protect data that's digital, but can be so easily revealed. I think there will, I'm going to backtrack from my previous prediction and say, I think there's going to be a growing fluency in negotiating the public register, and I think that I think that you know the most serious thing that I'm concerned about, both as a sort of internet freedom activist and you know as a human being, and you know Dana and I and others have talked about this, is that one of the worrying parts about the fluidity of the movement between the secret, the private, and the public is that people move very quickly up and down the celebrity square. I don't know whether any of you have seen the 13-year-old video of the video of a 13-year-old girl talking about slut shaming, which is just going up the viral register right now. I just got IM'd about it. And this is something that she put out to her friends in the private register, and now it's going viral. And this, of course, repeatedly happens. You know, Rebecca Black and so forth. And I'm concerned, right? I'm concerned because we know that when people are pulled out of that context, lifted up into the public space, and then dropped without kind of protection, the protection that the famous and the celebrity have gathered around them, and no training or competency in that area, it hits them very hard when they fall down. And as an activist, one of the areas that South Korea has always been kind of ahead of us in what happens, right? And South Korea's internet freedom was incredibly hard impacted by stories of pop stars committing suicide as a result of what was said online. And it was one of those things that just tricked people, and they immediately went into, we have to stop this from happening. You know, if Rebecca Black had committed suicide, some event like that is what causes civil liberties to be chilled and controlled. And of course it's a tragedy in itself. So we have to get better at this, and we have to understand those cultural changes. Okay, thank you very much. This is my public form at the Committee to Protect Journalists. This is my secret Twitter. It's not really secret if you go there. And if you want any real secrets, I'll tell you later on. Okay. Right. Yes.
Have you seen anything where I noticed like some programs and systems are now I know some programs are now making automatic things in the private register. Like I noticed on Path, like if I say I wake up, it goes, oh, it's 8 a.m. I think it's time to make a pot of coffee.
Right,
like, I never actually said that, right?
Right.
It sounds like I said that.
Well, so this is what interests me, right? Is the dialogue, the user dialogue, and conveying what level of intimacy you're sharing information with the computer alone, right? It's a way of trying to understand. The best example of this is the feature that all browsers now have, which is privacy mode, right? Which is a way that you explicitly flag to the browser that I don't want you to know about this, right? I don't want my personal
this is
big up. Okay, this is different.
I made a public action. Like I noticed the Facebook timeline, like has rearranged the importance of things. So something that I might have just been a picture that I put somewhere in an album, which would be totally okay, buried somewhere. Now Facebook is rearranging what it is that it looks like that I have intentionally promoted some things in a private way, right? Like, so Pat invented the wake up message, right? The time to make a pot of coffee sounds like something that I might have actually said, but I didn't actually say it.
Oh, right.
I woke up, you know.
Right.
I did a public action, but this thing is not being said in a public action. It's being said as if I had said a nice, friendly little private message to my friends. And then they're different every morning. But it still sounds like I said it.
That's really interesting.
But I didn't actually say it.
It's extremely interesting, and yet.